One, two, उन्होंने बहुत मारा फिर मैंने 220 को अलग कर अरे लगा कॉल यार उसको मैं नहीं ले रहा ठीक है उसके बाद में हमारा बैटिंग उन्होंने पता क्या किया उन्होंने क्लियर किया था मुकेश अरे मेरे को भी अफसोस मुकेश बचा था तो उसका यही 30-35 रन मार आउट हो गया मैंने उसको पूछा भाई नहीं किया बोला जाके देख लो आया तो ऑब्वियसली कोई बंदा आउट होता है अरे तो पूछ लो से मैं जाके बैटिंग करने लगा आमीन गया आउट हो गया फिर मैं अब वो सही भाई अलग खेल रहा हूं बहुत शुक्रिया ये उसकी शक्ल इतनी बढ़िया है डांस का लाइव देखेगा टाइम 1 सुनना यार 30 बॉल में 10 रन मारा चलो 20 ओवर के मैच भाई ये तो खेल रहा मैं खड़ा मेरे को हां बहुत अच्छा मैं मान ये मारा मेरा पहला शॉट को हमें का बहुत गंदा लगा बैट में बॉल नहीं लग रहा मेरा जीत गया अरे ऑब्वियस 10 रन अरे तुमने अभी बात थी क्यों मैच नहीं भाई क्या मेरा शॉट मेरा वो हर्षद का हमारा पिच में बॉलिंग में सारे को नहीं मेरा अच्छा मारा 2 विकेट लिया लेकिन अच्छा मारा अभी प्लानिंग अरे नहीं अभी अरे 2 मिनट मैं क्या आठ ओवर की बात तो मजा अंदर आ गए थे और हमारे बैट्समैन ने 4 विकेट लिए क्या और इधर वो ये तो भाई हैट्रिक के बाद इतना विकेट लिया और वो खुशी बहुत थी श्रीराम हैट्रिक में आउट हो गया तो बहुत अच्छा लगा पहला बॉल अच्छा आउट हो जाता कल्लू चलो मैं हमने आर्सेनल को पैसे नहीं दिए हमको झूठी बोल के यार देखो धमकी क्या देते थे कि अभी तो सीरिया में कभी खेल नहीं पाओगे मेरा भाई का अब उसके ग्राउंड में बिल्डिंग खड़ी है मुंबई में कहीं बस ऐसे हर्षद शाम खेलता है भाई मेरे पे सारी डिटेल्स आती है बिहार से पहले कौन था तू डिटेल्स उसको भाई को किसी का भाई को ऐसे ऐसे बोले ऐसे नहीं कैसे बोले ऐसे उसका कौन चलेगा ठीक वही करते तू करके उधर जाना तो क्यों अरे नीचे कोई बड़ा है कोई तो अभी
I was helping.
I thought some of you are so polite and you don't even know how to speak loud.
So silent.
Exactly. Your voice could be heard from down there, yelling and shouting and screaming. What was the reason?
What behind that?
So great friends.
No, please don't ask anything to be explained. Maybe I will not be in a position to accept all those things. Better, I don't want any explanation. This age group very dangerous. I don't want to hear anything from you. Better don't. Or don't scream.
Yes, ma'am.
That's good. Okay. So by snoring.
I thought 9:15.
9:15 is the second lecture. Remember, don't miss out. Okay.
Ma'am, can you shift someone from here because three people can't see?
Hey, you can sit there. Two person. Ma'am is saying, "मेरे को first bench पे क्यों बैठा था?" चल मैम है. I never said anything.
मैम ने तो सर कोई तो होगा ही सामने. Obviously.
हम इसके लिए ना
Come
आपको
here.
बोला था.
Free, you have to adjust. Since you difficult हो रहा है. You get up from there. Last. पानी गिर रहा है क्या इस तरह? No, no. But it's still wet. Is it wet?
तो मैं वो साइड चला जाऊंगा.
Go and call Sharad Bhaiya. He will just wipe out this side so one can accommodate here. Chalo, faster. Don't waste time. Make it fast. You get up by the time you get up from there. Take your books. How? This is your place. Listen, I'm not used to unnecessarily talking so much. I told you get up, meaning you get up. You get up from there, sit at the side for the time being, and you get in. You get in, give him place to sit at the edge there. तो थोड़ा ये खाली क्लीन कर देना. यहाँ पे पानी है तो यहाँ पे ये बैग.
Can I move that side? He's constantly speaking to families and it's getting very frustrating. Yes, please. Not so
You concentrate on it. Do your work very sincerely. नीचे है क्या पानी? Okay. Now, that's okay. Okay. Now move this side. You do one thing. You come here. Come here. Will you move this side now? And one can come this side. Of course, your parents have not asked you to come here to jump and hop like that in the classroom. Huh? Yes. Make it fast. In a minute, settle down. Who asked you to go at the back? Enough. So now, next, what are we going to start with? We are going to start with the phases of respiration. So now, we learn what are the different stages. To talk about respiration, what are the 4 stages? And you listen here. Get a good grip of the pen and the books. Huh? Every second, every minute, something is. See there. So now, when we are talking about the process of respiration, what are the 4 phases? What are the 4 phases? The phases would be, first of all, we start with breathing. We are going to talk about the phases of respiration. The first phase that we start is breathing. Number 1, the first phase of respiration, breathing. Next would be gaseous exchange. Next is gaseous exchange. Third is tissue respiration. Third is tissue respiration. And fourth would be cellular respiration. Talk about the concept of respiration. Now we learn respiration this way. Now we learn respiration in 4 stages. What are the basic 4 stages? Breathing, gaseous exchange, tissue respiration, and cellular respiration. We'll have to learn the definitions also and try understanding how they differ from each other. First of all, to talk about breathing, what is the major concept of breathing? What is meant by breathing? For the process of breathing, only we are talking about parts of the respiratory system from the nostrils till the lungs. The entire set of organs that we had just now studied from the nostrils, which are the parts of the respiratory system involved. The entire respiratory system is involved in breathing. From the nostrils to the lungs, the sequence of organs already we studied. Which are the organs involved in breathing? All of the respiratory organs, right from the nostrils till the lungs, are involved in the process of breathing. Then what is breathing? What is meant by breathing? The definition of breathing, always to clearly understand the taking in of air till the lungs and giving out of air from the lungs. That is what is breathing. Are we supposed to write the taking in of oxygen, which many children write? The taking in of oxygen, can we write that?
No, it's many other gases.
No, exactly. So never to write that. Understand what answer I am writing, how much it is right, how much it is wrong. When we are writing, what is the definition of breathing? I want all of you to write down the basic definitions of all of these, part by part as we study. What is meant by breathing and what are the stages of breathing? We are going to understand. What is meant by breathing? The first part, the first definition is the intake of air. The intake of air into the lungs. Intake of air. Now that I say intake of air, which air? Atmospheric air, remember. The intake of air into the lungs and the giving out of air from the lungs. the intake of air from the intake of air into the lungs and the giving out of air from the lungs is known as breathing. Is known as breathing. The intake of air from the lungs and the giving out of air from the lungs is known as breathing. Which are the parts involved? Right, start from the nostrils, the air goes and by the way of the trachea. After trachea, which set of tubes? After trachea, which set of tubes? Bronchi. And then by the way of the bronchioles. And then reach the lungs. So now that the air reaches the lungs, what would happen? Now that the air reaches the lungs, what would happen to every single alveolus? The alveolus would become inflated. So I talk about that after breathing, when the air is entering the lungs, a process known as inhalation. So what are the two phases then of breathing? The first phase of breathing is inhalation. And when we are talking about the air released out from the lungs or squeezed out from the lungs, that is what we are talking about as a process of exhalation. So breathing would involve two phases. What are the two phases we understand? Inhalation and exhalation. But the definition of breathing and the definition of inhalation is different. Again, I tell you, please take a note. When I'm talking about breathing, the intake of air till the lungs and the giving out of air from the lungs. Then what is inhalation? The taking in of air into the lungs and the lungs getting inflated. That is inhalation. So when I talk about inhalation, what will happen to the lungs? The lungs are expanded, but we don't write expanded. We will write the lungs are inflated. The lungs are, the single alveolus, overall lungs are inflated. What happens when the air is moving out from the alveolus? We will say the alveolus or the lungs are deflated. So once we are acquainted with these words, we have to learn the sequence now. So these are the two events happening one after the other every time that we talk about breathing. Now, talking about the concept of breathing and inhalation and exhalation, we'll have to understand what are the sequence of events that happen during inhalation. Try understanding. We are talking about the lungs getting inflated. That is what is inhalation, just now I told you. So the air is entering entire passages. The air is entering the nostrils and the nasal passages, the pharynx, larynx, bronchi, bronchiole, and the lungs. Now that we talk about the lungs, here we have to understand two features. One is, can you see these rib bones? Can you see these rib bones? So these rib bones and the diaphragm, these two structures play major role now that we are talking about inhalation and exhalation. How? If I talk about these rib bones, this particular rib bones, we understand this particular rib bones, if you see, this particular rib bones, they have muscles on their inner wall. This is the rib bone, say suppose I talk about, these are the rib bones. On the inner wall, there are some muscles which can contract and relax. So now that these muscles have got a name. What are those muscles? Intercostal. I will give you all the events. Let us learn this first. The muscles on the inner wall of the ribs are known as intercostal muscles. Now these intercostal muscles, when they contract, the ribs can move. Does the ribs move? Yes, they can. Whenever we are inhaling and we are exhaling, if ever you have noticed, the rib cage moves. The rib cage moves a little bit forward, and when you are exhaling, it goes back. So the same thing I'm telling you now, you can try out for yourself also. Take a deep breath and you will feel, you will understand that the ribs are moving a little bit in front. And exhale, the ribs go back. And that is constantly happening. How is it brought about? The bones, as it is, we always know the bones cannot move. There are some muscles which has to contract, relax to bring about the movement. Here also the same story. Here also the inner lining of the ribs have got some muscles contracting. Now, I talk about the concept of inhalation first. How do we inhale? What happens when we are inhaling? The moment we start inhaling, what is happening? The ribs move forward. That is number one, I'm telling you. What about the diaphragm here? When I talk about the diaphragm, if you see, the diaphragm is a muscular sheet just at the base of the lungs. How is the diaphragm normally? I would understand the diaphragm is slightly curved normally. The diaphragm, see in the picture also, in the image also, if you see, the diaphragm is slightly curved normally. Let me assume that this is the diaphragm that we have. At the base of the lungs, the diaphragm is slightly curved. Now that we are in the process of inhalation, what is happening to the diaphragm? The diaphragm is contracting and becoming curved more and more. Now you tell me, if this diaphragm is becoming curved more and more, and this particular, when I talk about this particular diaphragm, which is in the normal condition, slightly curved, I am talking about inhalation. During the process of inhalation, this diaphragm, which is slightly curved, starts contracting. Now the diaphragm is becoming flat. Are you following what I told you? I said normally the diaphragm is slightly curved. Now in the process of inhalation, the diaphragm starts becoming flat, contracts. What about the ribs? The ribs are moving a little bit forward. When these two things are happening, is the space inside the chest cavity increasing?
Yes.
Followed all of you? So this is increasing the lengthwise space. The diaphragm coming down will increase the vertical space. The ribs coming forward will increase the horizontal space. Overall, I would say the space inside the chest cavity increasing. Yes or no? So now the air can smoothly go in and the lungs are inflated. What is the meaning of inflation? Pumped out or say expanding. The lungs, individual alveolus filled with air, expanding. But the air can fill inside the lungs and the lungs can hold the air for a short time only. So just after a few seconds, what is happening? This rib bones, they start moving back. Horizontal space is decreased. So we would say the chest cavity space is decreased. What about the diaphragm now? The diaphragm was like this. Now the diaphragm starts moving and becoming curved like this. Relax. Earlier it was contracting. Now relax. So now that it is relaxed, is the space here decreasing?
Yes.
The diaphragm is curved. The ribs go back. The space inside the chest cavity is more or less reducing. So since it is reducing, the lungs inside are compressed. The air rushes out. Which process am I talking about? Exhalation. Is this clear? So these are the sequence of events you have to understand. Anybody who is not clear, because I will ask you to write on your own. If it is not clear, pucho. Aya samajh mein, what did I tell you? The sequence of events, that's very simple to understand. What I told you again, I repeat, see that if you have understood. If I have to talk about inhalation, what is inhalation? The taking in of air inside the lungs. And the lungs getting inflated. So iske liye events kya hai? Number one, the ribs will move forward and outward. These are the terms that you have to write. The ribs get forward, the ribs move forward and outward. So the space horizontally increasing. And what about the diaphragm I told you? Contract and flattens. So the vertical space also increasing. Air can smoothly fill inside the lungs and the lungs are inflated. Just after a couple of seconds, what happens? The diaphragm starts contracting and moving up like this. The diaphragm is like this now. Relaxes and becomes curved. The rib bones backward and downward. The space inside horizontally as well as vertically reduced. The lungs are squeezed. Air is forced out, a process known as exhalation. Yes or no? Understood all of you this? So we are going to write down the phases of inhalation and exhalation, and all of you will write this down in your notebook in points. I'll give you for inhalation. You should be able to write down for exhalation. Let's see. When we are talking about inhalation, what happens? What are the sequence of events? Sometimes you are asked to write down the events like this. Sometimes many questions based on this. What are some of the events we have just now studied after about the concept of inhalation? For inhalation, first of all, the ribs move outward and the ribs move outward and upward. The ribs move outward and upward. Upward due to the contraction of the intercostal muscles. Due to the contraction of the intercostal muscles. Next point is what? Diaphragm. Diaphragm contracts and flattens. Diaphragm contracts and flattens. Understand and write so you remember for a long time. Diaphragm contracts and flattens. Third, space of the chest cavity increases. Space of chest cavity increases. Next, lungs are inflated. So you understand now what is the meaning of inflated. Inflated means filled with air. Clear? Complete this first. Then we will write down inhalation and exhalation are just the opposite processes. If this is for inhalation, where are the changes we'll have to make for exhalation events to write down? First, complete this.
Exhalation is just the opposite.
Just the opposite. So where are the changes? All of you finish with this, then we will write here exhalation. From here, if this concept is clear, you should be able to answer many questions on this. Sometimes you may be asked to write down the events, not necessarily every time you are asked to write down the events straight away like this. Done for inhalation over. Now for exhalation, if you have to write down, let us check where are the changes to be made. Flattens, flattens, increases. Chest cavity, space of the chest cavity increases. Done. Inhalation, all of you done. Now, if you have to talk about, now the next phase you will write is exhalation. Now tell me, where are the changes I made? Ribs move inward and downward. So I write here inward and downward.
Relaxation of intervals.
Those of you are still writing for inhalation, complete, and then you start with exhalation. Okay, next.
Relaxation.
Due to the relaxation, we don't write contraction. Now this will be relaxation. Diaphragm contracts and flattens. Diaphragm relaxes and becomes curved. Space of chest cavity decreases. Lungs
Are deflated.
deflated. Done? Or if you're done, clear with this concept now? So we are already finished with the first stage. What is the first step of respiration? The first phase of respiration is breathing. Now the breathing is over. So we will start from the concept of inhalation. After inhalation, what? So after inhalation is the concept of gaseous exchange. Inhalation, exhalation are two opposite processes, but now we start after inhalation what? But after inhalation are the concept of gaseous exchange. Try understanding here step by step. It's very easy once you're able to follow. Gaseous exchange means what? I have to understand that for the process of gaseous exchange, what is necessary? The air which has entered the alveolus, what is the fate of that air? I talk about this alveolus. The process of inhalation has happened, and after the process of inhalation, which we had already defined, inhalation is the intake of air. So now what is here inside the alveolus? Inside the alveolus, there is more of oxygen and lesser amount of carbon dioxide. Can you tell me why? Can you tell me why? After the process of inhalation, for every specific alveolus, if we understand, now that the process of inhalation is over, what is the condition in every specific alveolus? In every specific alveolus, the amount of proportion of oxygen is more than carbon dioxide. Why?
Because it's air and
Filter कहाँ पे? I told you, never write that. We don't breathe in oxygen, we breathe in air. We take in air. No? You have studied that in the 9th standard.
because there is more oxygen in the air.
Very good. Because if I talk about the atmospheric air, what is the proportion of oxygen in the atmospheric air?
21%.
And carbon dioxide? 0. Less than 1%. So I would say 0.05%. No? So if I talk about that 21% in comparison to that 0.5%, 0.05%. So what is happening? Anytime when you inhale, the lungs, every single alveolus has got more of oxygen as compared to carbon dioxide. So this is a condition that always you have to understand. Every single alveolus, now that we have inhaled, every single alveolus has got much more oxygen than carbon dioxide. What are the features of the alveolus we already learned? The features of the alveolus that we learned is every single alveolus is thin wall and every single alveolus has got a large number of blood supply. So I talk about some blood vessels around it. What was the feature? Do you remember the feature we talked about? The membrane of the alveolus, thin wall made up of single layer epithelium. So allowing the process of diffusion very smoothly. On top of that, this particular alveolus, every single alveolus has got rich supply of blood vessels. Because we are talking about a comparison of the blood and the medium in the lungs. Now what is happening? We are talking about gaseous exchange. What should happen? This oxygen is always found diffusing this direction. The oxygen molecules are constantly diffusing from the lungs towards the blood. Why? Because when I compare the blood and the air inside the lungs has got more of oxygen and the blood has got comparatively lesser amount of oxygen. So what process am I talking about? Diffusion, movement of the oxygen from the lungs towards the blood. Is this gaseous exchange? Yes, this is the first part of gaseous exchange where I am talking about. The oxygen molecules smoothly diffuses from the lungs towards the blood vessels. But now that the oxygen molecules move here, what is the fate of these oxygen molecules? What would happen to these oxygen molecules? These oxygen molecules now will start resulting in the formation of a compound. Compound, yes. First of all, to understand that this blood has got certain cells, the blood cells, one specific type of cells that I understand. What are these cells? The RBCs, red blood corpuscles. What is so specific about the red blood corpuscles? They have a pigment known as hemoglobin. This hemoglobin and the oxygen, they have great affinity for each other. The bonding is very, very fast. Gradually they enter into a bond formation. So by the time the oxygen is entered into the blood, what will happen? This hemoglobin and oxygen will result in the formation of a compound. And what is this compound known as? This compound is known as oxyhemoglobin. So what is the temporary compound formed by hemoglobin and oxygen in the blood? The compound known as oxyhemoglobin. So for this first part, we are first of all understanding that what happens to oxygen at, now this is what you call it as the tissue surface. Remember all the words that we speak. This is the respiratory surface. This is first of all. The respiratory surface I am talking about first. What do you understand when I talk about respiratory surface? What do you understand when you read in the book respiratory surface? Respiratory surface means the blood vessel and the lungs, the exchange that is happening there. Respiratory surface meaning the exchange is happening between the lungs and the blood vessels. Respiratory surfaces. So at this surface, at this region, what type of exchange is happening? The oxygen is moving towards the blood. Give a reason. What reason are you supposed to write? In the lungs, oxygen is at a higher concentration compared to the blood. Name the compound formed. Oxyhemoglobin. How is the oxygen distributed in the blood or distributed in the body? Oxygen is never distributed as molecules, but always in the form of a compound known as oxyhemoglobin. Now we go further to understand. Remember, I'm just talking about a sequence of reactions, sequence of steps, but this is randomly happening in the body. To make it easier, I talk about a sequence happening. Now this oxyhemoglobin, that means the blood is loaded with such type of molecules. The blood has got a whole lot of such type of molecules. But what would then happen if the blood comes in contact, or the blood vessels are near the body tissues? The blood vessels definitely would be running all along the blood, all along the body tissues, surrounding the body tissue. Such type of blood vessels are numerous, and the blood is containing this type of a compound. What is the name of this compound? The name of this compound is oxyhemoglobin. So I told first of all what is happening at the tissue, at the respiratory surface. Now I go to the next level, the tissue surface. Now I go to the tissue surface. Now in the tissue surface, what? In the tissue surface, the moment the blood runs over the tissues, now the comparison is between the blood and the tissue cells. When the blood vessels are running over the body tissues, now the comparison is between the blood and the tissue cells. So now this oxygen will straight away enter the body cells. This oxygen will constantly enter into the body cells. Why will the oxygen enter the body cells? Again, the answer is the same. The oxygen will enter the body cells because the body cells always has got a lesser amount of oxygen as compared to the blood vessels. The blood has got more of oxygen any time as compared to the body cells. Clear? Now, why like that? So if I understand that this oxygen is now entering the body cells are getting the oxygen, then what is happening to these body cells in that case? I talk about any particular body cell. What is happening inside the body cell? The body cells already has got the glucose. What happening?
Mom, they're increasing the price. It's already very cold. It's already very cold. You all have given jackets.
Oh my God.
This is
And these boys are becoming bigger. And the girls. Hello.
I think it's morning wine rather than actual temperature. Mom, it gets too cold and then everybody is sleeping.
Who is feeling hot? Are you
Mom, they're always तूने कभी बोला Mom, no.
तो इसके लगातार इसने बोला नहीं बोला कि करो लेकिन टाइम उसको मिल रहा है
Street करो नहीं
Girls
sweat
always learn to tolerate. Guys, please start to tolerate.
Okay.
Okay.
ठंडी हो गई मैं जैकेट पहन के मम एक्चुअली
So that means you all are okay. बड़ा फिजिक्स केमिस्ट्री तुम्हारा स्ट्रांग है क्यों? Okay, okay. Now listen here, girls, थोड़ा tolerate करो. Sub, I don't know which t-shirts also you all are feeling, but actually it is not very cold.
it is very good.
ठीक है. Feeling cold? Feeling cold? There as it is out of the fan and the AC range.
हमको एसी का टेंपरेचर भी 25 है।
हाँ तो AC का टेम्परेचर थोड़ा बढ़ा दो, का रिमोट कहाँ है?
फिर फैन आप
कम कर दो थोड़ा।
हमारे पास
जा, ठीक है। See the way he's working. Okay. Now, what I told you. First of all, again, try comparing the blood and the tissue cells. First of all, this part is understood where we understand oxygen from the alveolus. Put it at 22.
And
22 number. 20 पे है?
मैम लग रहा है आपको
तो नहीं रहा वैसे।
मैं
चेकिंग करते हैं।
हवाई नहीं
चेकिंग
आ
का
रहा है।
फैन कम कर।
अभी नहीं
ये लोग एसी और फैन ऑपरेट करने के लिए आते हैं यहाँ पे।
20 मिनट में हवाई
पढ़ने के लिए थोड़ी कोई आया है।
अंजना
बस हो गया चलो बैठो इट्स कूल ना।
अंजना
फैन चाहिए तो एक ऑफ कर दो इस तरफ एक खाली।
दोनों फैन ऑफ कर दो।
अरे ऑफ किया ना उससे
नहीं
पानी
एसी तो
गिरता
काम ही नहीं कर
है।
रहा कैसे ऑन होगा। चलो
Yes.
डन।
Yes, ma'am.
Can we concentrate on the topic now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Boys, what did you all have in the morning that your body is so heated up? I saw this person having chocolates in the morning.
मुकुल रखिए
Have healthy food. Be strong enough. 11th standard का bench उठाएगा कैसे? 11th 12 को बुक्स ही नहीं उठा पाएगा बोलेगा क्या? वड़ा पाव से खाके तो सोफे में बैठ जाना ही है बस। उठने लायक रहेगा तुम। Now we talk about this. When we talk about the concept, back to this topic again. We are talking about a concept of exchange of gases. We have to learn how the oxygen and the carbon dioxide constantly keeps on moving from one region to the other. First of all, I mentioned if it is the alveolus and we are comparing alveolus and the nearby blood vessel, something that we call it as the respiratory surface. So what will happen? What is the movement of the oxygen from the lungs towards the blood vessel? Reason, concentration of oxygen much more as compared to the blood. Then next in the blood, what is the process happening? Next in the blood, a temporary compound is getting formed. What is the name of that temporary compound? Oxyhemoglobin. And talk about hemoglobin, what is it? It is a respiratory pigment. Keep noting down. What is hemoglobin, right? What is hemoglobin? In the next part of the chapter also you will come across. What is hemoglobin? It is a respiratory, red colored respiratory pigment. What is the definition of hemoglobin? It is a red-colored respiratory pigment which has a high affinity, affinity meaning attraction, which has a high affinity for oxygen. Red-colored respiratory pigment. Red-colored respiratory pigment which has a high affinity for oxygen. So now here affinity spelling भी बताना है टेंशन AFFINITY. So now that किसको नहीं पता affinity spelling शक्ल दिखाओ
नहीं उसको सेंटेंस ही बताइए.
Now when we are talking about back in the blood, the temporary compound formed is oxyhemoglobin. Now this oxyhemoglobin, all of you look at the figure there on the board. Now that we talk about the oxyhemoglobin, as the blood flows over the tissues, the oxyhemoglobin starts breaking down. The oxyhemoglobin starts breaking down. The reason is oxygen concentration is less in the blood and oxygen concentration more in the blood, less in the tissues. I repeat, this oxyhemoglobin, when the blood passes through the tissue cells, the oxyhemoglobin, which is a temporary compound, will start breaking down. Why will it break down? Because the concentration of oxygen here is much more as compared to the concentration of oxygen here in the individual body cells, the tissue cells. And at this region, when I'm comparing the tissue cells and the blood, we are going to name it as the tissue surface. We are going to name it as the tissue surface. What do you understand by tissue surface? The comparison happening or the exchange happening between the tissue and the blood. So what is the movement of the oxygen here? The oxygen is moving from the blood to the tissues. But what is the role of the oxygen inside the tissue cells? This oxygen will be used up in breaking the glucose, which is already there in the body cells by the process of assimilation that I already mentioned. What are the products now? You've already written that equation. What are the products now that I should write? The products are carbon dioxide, water, and ATP, right? Now, what is this entire process known as, which is happening inside every single tissue cell? This particular process is known as cellular respiration. What is this? Cellular respiration. Why the word cellular? Because cellular respiration. Why the word cellular? Because it is happening inside every body cell. Hence the word cellular respiration. So now, if we start summarizing from here, what is exchange of gases? I have discussed half of it only right now. What did I talk about? I had talked about the exchange of oxygen only, the movement of oxygen only. Oxygen is moving at the respiratory surface. What is the direction of oxygen movement? At the respiratory surface. What is the direction of the movement of oxygen? Alveolus to the blood. At the tissue surface, what is the direction of movement of oxygen? Blood vessels to the tissue cells. What is the job? What is the Did your parents send you here to do all this? Adelaide, know your name?
Yes, ma'am, but I cannot do it.
But you are enjoying it.
No, ma'am, I'm not.
Nonsense I will not tolerate in my class. Let me make it very clear. Let me make it very clear. Immediately I will call for your parent. You are sincere in the class. I will be there to help you anytime, at whatever level. Ask me explain 10 times, I'll do that. Pranks and everything I enjoy more than some of you perhaps. But focus on the work. I'm explaining and you're doing nonsense. This, of course, I will not. See that it never happens. One more time that, what's your name? Yug. Yug. Okay. One more time, your parent will call. I don't give too many number of times. Once, at the most twice. Your parent, this is 10th standard, remember. Now, when we are talking about this, and the last one also, you did not come here to study. You did not come here to study. Your name? Tanishq. Bioman Tanishq.
Just Tanish.
तनिष्क अच्छा वो के नहीं है तनिष्क अच्छा
I did nothing.
वही तो you are not doing anything वो attention का meaning सोच के आना पड़ेगा. So now that I did not tell you anything, now that I had to tell him, I had to tell you also, otherwise it would have been unjustified. इसको मैंने डांटा और तुमको नहीं डांटा क्योंकि तुमको मैं काफी बार मैं देख रही हूँ. I observed, but I did not tell you anything. देखो 10th standard children, you should be very much. मेरा चेहरा ना बहुत भोला भाला. I don't want to scold you, but don't give me enough reasons. Don't give me enough reasons. The next one also. You all come and sit down with innocent faces and do all types of mischiefs possible. एक test होने दो. Let me just see how much you all are performing. Then I'll pull you up. Now, this, when we are talking about this exchange, what do we call it as? At the tissue surface, what is the direction of movement of the oxygen?
Blood vessels.
Tissue cells. What is the role of the oxygen in the tissue cells? Breakdown of glucose to release carbon dioxide and ATP. Now we are talking about carbon dioxide. Because we are learning respiration, we are more interested to know about carbon dioxide. Now, what will be the role of carbon dioxide here? Talk about that every single tissue cell, talking about carbon dioxide, every single tissue cell will have more of carbon dioxide, or the blood will have more of carbon dioxide? The tissue cells. What did I tell you just now? As the blood vessel passes over the tissues, the blood gives away oxygen to the tissues. The oxygen is used up in this way, releasing carbon dioxide. So every single tissue cell is readily, very fast using the oxygen. I'm sorry, I correct my statement. Every single tissue cell is very fast using the oxygen and releasing carbon dioxide also very fast. So compare carbon dioxide here and carbon dioxide here. More of carbon dioxide here. Understanding?
Yes.
More of carbon dioxide here. Then what will be the direction of carbon dioxide movement? From the tissue cells to the blood. But which process are we talking about? Diffusion again. And the definition of diffusion is always what? The definition of diffusion is movement of molecules from a region of high concentration to a region of low concentration. Talk about oxygen. Again, the same rule, no? Movement of molecules from a region of high to a region of low. Till here, understood? What did I speak? I had been talking about gaseous exchange. And what is the concept of gaseous exchange? Exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide at the respiratory as well as at the tissue surface. Yes or no? So now, what would be the role of this carbon dioxide? What will happen to this carbon dioxide? Now, this carbon dioxide, am I supposed to tell you that it is going to get bonded again with hemoglobin? Yes, little bit of it, not all of it. For carbon dioxide to understand, carbon dioxide will exactly not behave like oxygen. What will happen to this carbon dioxide? It will get broken down and a fraction of it remains in the blood plasma as bicarbonates. And only a small portion of it will bind with hemoglobin, resulting in the formation of a temporary compound again. I'll tell you, when I explained oxygen, what did I tell you? All the oxygen binds with hemoglobin. But isn't the same thing happening with carbon dioxide also? Is all the carbon dioxide which is coming from the tissue cells entering into the blood, all of it gets bonded with hemoglobin? No, all of it does not get bonded with hemoglobin. Only a small fraction. Say suppose 25% gets bonded, the rest 70-75% remains in the blood plasma as bicarbonates. When I say plasma, what is it? Plasma is the liquid part of the blood. Clear? Plasma is actually the liquid part of the blood. So this carbon dioxide breaks up, forming bicarbonates, जो blood plasma में dissolve हो जाता है, and that has nothing to do with lungs right now. And a small fraction binds with hemoglobin, forming a temporary compound again. The name is not necessary for you now. There is a particular name also for this. So this temporary compound remains in the blood, and again when this particular temporary compound, in the course of blood circulation, the blood vessels will again run through the lungs. This blood carrying this particular compound with hemoglobin and carbon dioxide also will come near the lungs again, because the blood is constantly flowing all over the body. So what will happen to this carbon dioxide now? This carbon dioxide will now diffuse into the lungs back. Why again? The reason remains the same. When I compare carbon dioxide here and here, your carbon dioxide, The blood is flowing. Now remember, that's why I told you. The blood is flowing in one particular direction. So I can also say that there is one more alveolus the other side, and the blood vessels are constantly running in the form of a network. The blood vessels are constantly in the form of a network. So we cannot say that the blood is just running unidirectional. It's not unidirectional in our body. But say suppose if I show you this way also that there is one more alveolus. If I understand that, talk about another single alveolus. Okay, if I talk about one more single alveolus and the blood vessel running very close, then what will happen to this? The compound known as between hemoglobin and carbon dioxide, what should happen? The carbon dioxide will always move into the lungs. I showed you in the same alveolus, believing that the blood always moves in all possible directions. So if I consider that there are some other alveolus this side, then what will happen to the carbon dioxide? It will enter into the lungs now, into the alveolus now. Is this follow?
Yes.
What is gaseous exchange? Now we understand the entire story. What is gaseous exchange? Oxygen from here to here, from here to here. Carbon dioxide from here to here, and then from blood to the lungs back again. So how do we define what is gaseous exchange? The diffusion of oxygen from the lungs to the blood and then from the blood to the tissues.
Can you repeat this?
I'll give you wait. Understand first. Are you understanding? When I talk about gaseous exchange, the exchange of what are we talking about? We are only talking about the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide in different directions. So when I say oxygen, first of all, try understanding oxygen moving from the lungs to the blood and then from blood to the tissues. That is one way. Oxygen diffusion is this much. What about carbon dioxide? Carbon dioxide from the tissues to the blood and then from the blood to the lungs back. And now that I talk about exhalation, the exhaled air will always have more of carbon dioxide. And now that I talk about inhaled air, the inhaled air will always have more of oxygen. Is this understood? So if it is a concept of gaseous exchange, now what is the definition? Let us write down. What is the definition of gaseous exchange? The exchange of gases, that is diffusion of oxygen from alveolus to blood, diffusion of oxygen from alveolus to blood and from the blood to the tissues, diffusion of oxygen from the alveolus to blood and then from blood to the tissues, and diffusion of carbon dioxide from tissue cells to the blood. You follow the diagram and write. Diffusion of carbon dioxide from tissue cells to the blood and from blood to lungs. Understood? So if I ask you, if you get a question, what is the direction of movement of carbon dioxide at the tissue surface? What is your answer?
Towards lungs.
9.
From tissue cells.
What is the direction of carbon dioxide movement at the tissue surface? Carbon dioxide is moving from the tissue cells towards the blood.
And then
Understood, no? What is the direction of movement of oxygen at the respiratory surface? Lungs to blood vessels. So various type of questions you get. Name the temporary compound formed in the blood between oxygen and hemoglobin. No, HbO2 नहीं बताना है, oxyhemoglobin.
That is temporary.
That is temporary. Temporary इसीलिए because it is unstable, and that's why as it goes near the tissues, it immediately breaks down.
Both is unstable.
Both these are unstable. That's the reason they are breaking down whenever there is a concentration differences. Understood this one? Now that we are talking about the concept of gaseous exchange. Then now, separately again to understand tissue respiration. Then what is it? Tissue respiration and cellular, the respiratory surfaces exchanges are almost the same thing. When I talk about tissue respiration, separately you are talking about this. Only between the blood vessel and the tissues. Gaseous exchange, this and this together. Tissue respiration, is it absolutely different a concept? No, tissue respiration is only this part that we understand. So what is happening at the tissues? When I compare the tissue and the blood, what is happening there? Oxygen moving from blood to tissues, carbon dioxide moving from tissue to blood. This is what is called tissue respiration. So if I ask you, or if you at all get a definition, what is meant by tissue respiration? What are you supposed to write? The movement of oxygen or the diffusion of oxygen from the blood towards the tissues and carbon dioxide from the tissues towards the blood vessel. This is what is known as tissue respiration. Cellular respiration, a definition always you are asked. Then what is cellular respiration? That's the last level. That's the last stage of respiration to understand. When I talk about cellular respiration, the fourth step that I talked about, this fourth step, the cellular respiration. Now, how to define? How will you define? Look at the diagram. How to define the breakdown of the glucose inside the body cells using oxygen is known as cellular respiration. What are the products of cellular respiration? Tell me.
Carbon dioxide and
ATP. Energy in the form of ATP. Clear, Adeline? Not sad, no? Don't be sad. So when we are smile, you have got a lovely smile. Smile, come on. But not doing any nonsense with this one. And if he is doing nonsense, you tell him that this is time to study. You get the break, no? After the lecture also, you are all of you are down there for half an hour. 15 minutes be enough.
Now can you repeat cellular respiration?
Enough, hai? He's a very good boy. Now, cellular respiration. What is the definition? Write down cellular respiration. Understand and write. Will you be able to write on your own the definition of cellular respiration? The breakdown of glucose.
Yes, ma'am.
I wrote till then.
Breakdown of glucose with the presence of oxygen in the body cells.
Glucose.
With the presence of oxygen. Breakdown of glucose. ये देखो ना diagram देख के समझ के लिखो. Breakdown of glucose in the presence of oxygen to release carbon dioxide, water and ATP in the body cells. The breakdown of glucose in the presence of oxygen to release carbon dioxide, water and ATP. Carbon dioxide, water and ATP. Where is this process taking place?
Tissue cell.
In the tissue cells, in the body cells. So that is your complete answer.
Not to release carbon dioxide, water.
Carbon dioxide, water and ATP in the body cells is known as cellular respiration. Understood all of you?
Yes.
Try to understand so you remember better. So here we have been done 2 minutes. So now that we talk about the entire concept of respiration, what did we learn? We had been talking about breathing. What was breathing? During the process of breathing, we take in air and the lungs are inflated. But for the inflation of the lungs, we had understood what are the steps? The rib cage, the diaphragm. So because of these two major parts of the body, the chest cavity space has to increase and then only the lungs will be inflated. Just the reverse we talk about as exhalation. What did we learn? Again, the rib cage and the diaphragm play a major role. During the process of inhalation, the diaphragm contracts or flattens or becomes curved. During inhalation, the diaphragm flattens or becomes curved, flat. So that way you'll have to remember the points. So that is all about the concept of inhalation. After inhalation, now we study from here. Exchange of gases, exchange of gases. After exchange of gases, we learned cellular respiration. What are the products of cellular respiration? Carbon dioxide and water. Water also. Major carbon dioxide and energy.
What happens to the water?
Water is released as you breathe. When you breathe on a glass pane, is there water vapor there?
Yes.
A little.
So that is an indication that exhalation also, or the exhaled air has got adequate amount of water. And how is that water released? At the level of the cells it is released. No. So this sweat is not this. Sweat is not this water. This water is the exhaled water.
Just
That one. So now that we are talking about the basic concept. Now next is what we are going to understand. That is it that every organism requires oxygen for the process of breakdown? No. We are talking about the developed group of organisms which show the process of breakdown of glucose this way, the breakdown of the organic food this way. Then if it is that if we are talking about the process of respiration which happens in single celled organisms, something like the bacteria or the yeast, there are various different type of organisms which does not require oxygen for the process of breakdown, and these are those group of organisms which require only small amount of energy. The energy requirement is much lesser than us. So here we are talking about the concept of the different types of respiration. What are the different types of respiration that we understand? The types of respiration, the different methods of respiration that we come across would be aerobic and anaerobic. What are these? Aerobic methods of respiration. Aerobic respiration we talk about, and anaerobic respiration we talk about. What is aerobic respiration? When we are talking about aerobic respiration, what are some of the features? For aerobic respiration, the equation would be something like this that already we had written down, which utilizes oxygen. And what are the products then? The products would be same like what we wrote earlier. 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, 6 molecules of water, and 38 molecules of ATP. What type of organisms would show this process? Aerobic respiration. Aerobic respiration is always shown by organisms which are always complex and developed. So I may say variety of all the vertebrates, rather all the vertebrates. When we are talking about vertebrates, for example, vertebrates, what are some of the vertebrates we can talk about? I talk about all the birds, and we talk about the human, we talk about the reptiles, we talk about the frog. All these organisms are all vertebrates, and they all are. But then at the same time, when we are talking about aerobic respiration, there can be a large number of invertebrates also, which are those organisms which does not have the bones and the cartilage, but they may have well-developed respiratory structures. What such examples? I may talk about the earthworm, I may talk about the snail. So all these examples, remember, I just summarized this way. First of all, what is this? A concept of aerobic respiration. What is the major requisite here? The major requisite is these are those organisms which utilize oxygen for the process of breakdown of glucose.
Even earthworm.
Even earthworm. But then, when we are talking about that, then what is so special in these group of organisms? What are the special features that these organisms have? The special features that these organisms have are majorly two to remember. They have got a well-developed respiratory system. They have got a well-developed respiratory system. They should be having well-developed respiratory structures. And they should have a large number of mitochondria in their cells. They should have a large number of mitochondria in their cells. And what are these group of organisms known as? If you have to give a single word, aerobes. What are these organisms known as? Aerobic or aerobic organisms or aerobes. So what are we learning here? We are saying that a large number of organisms which can utilize oxygen for the breakdown of glucose, these organisms are known as what? These organisms are known as aerobic or aerobic organisms or aerobes. And what is so special in them? these organisms can produce a large amount of energy. These organisms can produce a large amount of energy. Here I am talking about a huge amount of energy produced per molecule of glucose. They have the capacity to utilize the oxygen. How? Because they have got large number of mitochondria. Do you remember what was the job of mitochondria? Powerhouse of energy. The powerhouse of the cells, you have understood always. To produce ATP. So what are some special features of these organisms? I talk about the bird and the frog and the fish and the human and the dog and the cat, etc. What are some special features? Are they all aerobic? Yes, they are all aerobic. Then what is that special feature that they have? Apart from so many, and at least one or two to mention, they have got well-developed respiratory structures. Something like us, something like the fishes. Well-developed respiratory structure they should be having. And on top of that, every single cell should be having a large number of mitochondria to utilize that oxygen and break it down or convert them into ATP. So that is a major requisite. But if I talk about the bacteria, right now, surrounding your face and your hand and your nose and your mouth and your fingers, there are hundreds and hundreds of bacteria. So now that we are talking about this bacteria and we are in the same environment, but only difference is the bacteria is not having well-developed respiratory system, so that's the reason they are not able to utilize that oxygen. They don't have mitochondria in their cells, and that's the reason they are not able to utilize, break down the food the way we can. So what are those methods of respiration known as? That is known as anaerobic. Aerobic and anaerobic. So what is the other type of respiration possible? The other mode of respiration possible is anaerobic respiration. So anaerobic respiration that we understand. Anaerobic respiration is majorly for those different type of organisms which cannot utilize oxygen present in the environment. Then what would be their process of glucose breakdown? Their process of glucose breakdown is without the oxygen, but using certain specific type of enzymes in their cells. And what would be the prominent compound form? The prominent compound form would be ethanol or ethyl alcohol. Ethanol or ethyl alcohol. And then molecules of carbon dioxide and 2 molecules of ATP only. 2 molecules of carbon dioxide and 2 molecules of ATP only. Now see the contrast. Here we are talking about if it is an aerobic organism like us.
How they form ATP? They don't have mitochondria.
They don't have mitochondria, but then they have got certain mesosomes, similar structures which can produce small amount of energy. They have got similar type of, like say suppose if I talk about the plant cells also, they have got certain organelles with similar like our animal cells which can do a similar function, but in a different way. They don't have large number of mitochondria. Some of them may have just few. So the energy release is much lesser, that's why. So what is the process of breakdown? The glucose without oxygen with the help of certain few enzymes will get broken down to the predominant product. What is the main product you have to write? Ethanol. Ethyl alcohol, along with that small amount of carbon dioxide and ATP. What is this process known as? This process is known as alcoholic fermentation. This particular process is seen in various different, when we talk about industrial processes also, it can be carried out. And at the same time, if I understand what are some of the organisms which show this process, a large number of bacteria can show this process, certain different type of fungus can show this process. These different type of organisms, a large number of bacteria and the yeast, etc., they don't have specialized cell organelles inside to carry out processes like ours. Their process is comparatively simpler. Now I said alcoholic fermentation. This is a process which is industrially also been carried out. When we talk about the process of making beverages, this process has been used, where they would add variety of such type of organisms, yeasts, bacteria, to bring about the processing of the substance. Say suppose it can be the rice, the fermented rice, or it can be the fermented various different type of juices, the cane, sugar, etc., etc. Now that we talk about this particular process known as alcoholic fermentation is also happening in our own homes. When we are talking about the curdling of the milk, when we are talking about the leavening up or the rising up of the batter of the dosa and the idli that we make at home, almost a similar process is working there, because there also the bacteria which are naturally growing there are carrying out these processes. So when we start heating the dough of the idli, dosa, etc., etc., the carbon dioxide releases. When we also start talking about making the bread and the bun, same process. The carbon dioxide releases when the dough is heated up, and that makes the entire dough spongy and fluffy. So when we are talking about start from making the beverages and the curdling processes and the making of variety of foodstuffs, this process is industrially used also. But this is a process which is normally naturally happening in the body of the bacteria, in the cells of the yeast. Then what is the difference now we talk about? Aerobic and anaerobic respiration, the two primary methods of respiration that we understand. Of course, majority of the organisms show this method, but few organisms show that also. Then what are some differences to always remember? The first difference is this one. This is the first difference that you remember. Presence of oxygen. Aerobic respiration, a method in which glucose is getting broken down in the presence of oxygen, and anaerobic in the absence of oxygen. So that remains the first. What is the primary product? That is the second difference that you have to write down. What are the products?
Carbon dioxide.
Products here are carbon dioxide, water, ATP. Products that side? Ethanol, carbon dioxide, and ATP. Third, also this to mention. Third, 38 molecules of ATP per molecule of glucose, for every molecule of glucose. And here we write only 2 molecules of ATP for every single molecule of glucose. So which are the 3 major differences? Make a table fast and write down on your own. Come on, fast. 3 major differences between aerobic and anaerobic. We are yet to learn one more concept about respiration. Make it fast. What are the 3 major differences? You will write in a column, neat, nice presentation always. Make a column, make a column, make a column, and then you write. Make a habit of writing neat and nice. 3 basic differences between aerobic and anaerobic respiration. Is it there? 3 major differences between aerobic and anaerobic respiration. Write fast. The first point is breakdown of glucose. Don't write respiration. Breakdown of glucose, aerobic. Breakdown of glucose takes place. Breakdown of glucose takes place in the presence of oxygen. For aerobic, the first one. Breakdown of glucose takes place in the presence of oxygen. For anaerobic,
Breakdown of glucose in the absence.
Absence. Right. Anaerobic, breakdown of glucose takes place in the absence of oxygen. In the absence of oxygen. Next. Next, write down the products. Next point. The products are, for aerobic respiration, write down. See here and write down. The products are carbon dioxide, water, and 38 molecules of ATP. And the other side, products for anaerobic, you write. The products are ethyl alcohol, carbon dioxide, and ATP. Ethyl alcohol, carbon dioxide, and ATP.
Don't have to specify the number.
No, that in the next point you write. during the exam, you may get different sort of questions. So I'm giving you all the 3 points together. You have no confusion to write down the points. Third point you write aerobic. Third point you write 38 molecules of ATP produced for every molecule of glucose. 38 molecules of ATP produced. Did you write that? Third one. 38 molecules of ATP produced for every molecule of glucose. For every single molecule of glucose. For every single molecule of glucose, 38 molecules of ATP produced. This side, 2 molecules of ATP for every molecule of glucose. 2 molecules of ATP for every molecule of glucose. Now write down 2 examples each for organisms showing aerobic and anaerobic respiration. Is this clear?
What would be the second example for anaerobic?
Anaerobic yeast, bacteria. There are various bacterial forms, so generally we are writing only bacteria. Now, when we talk about the concept of respiration, that is not the end. We again try understanding that what would be the different pathways of the glucose breakdown. Now that you already know what is aerobic and anaerobic, now this is the summary that we try understanding and wind up with this part. So here now already you know what is meant by aerobic, what type of organisms, what is meant by anaerobic, what type of organisms, what are the products, etc., etc. Now, but before that, whether it is the human or the yeast, human and yeast, there's a big difference, no? If I have to compare the human and the yeast, there's a big difference. Human is producing 38 molecules of ATP per 1 molecule of glucose, per molecule of glucose. And what about the yeast and the bacteria? Only 2 molecules of ATP. Just now we studied if it is the parrot and the pigeon and the human and the camel, we are all aerobic organisms. And if it is the yeast and the bacteria, they are all anaerobic. But one thing that is common, one process that is common between the yeast and the human, the simplest and the complex, the aerobic and the anaerobic is the process of breakdown of the glucose to pyruvic acid first of all. What are we learning? We are learning little bit elaborate that is it that glucose straight away getting converted to carbon dioxide? Is it that glucose straight away getting converted to that ethanol? No, there are some intermediate phases which is common for the yeast, bacteria, human, camel, dog, elephant, all. And after this particular phase, now there is a decision. If it is a camel's body or a body of a amphibian or a reptile, the method is different. If it is the body of a bacteria, yeast, the method is different. So what is that? We are trying understanding that the glucose in every single organism's body, whether it is a yeast or the human, in every single organism's body, the glucose will first of all get broken down to pyruvic acid. What is the name of this compound? Pyruvic acid. Glucose is a 6-carbon sugar and pyruvic acid is a 3-carbon sugar. So this glucose can get broken down to 2 molecules of pyruvic acid every time. And what is this process known as? This process is known as glycolysis. Glycolysis. Glyco means sugar. Lysis means breakdown, sugar breakdown. Inside the cells it is happening. Where is this process happening? This process is happening in the cytoplasm of every cell. Whether you talk about bacteria, yeast, camel, dog, pigeon, human, every organism. So what is this I am talking about first? Breakdown of glucose to pyruvic acid. How many molecules of pyruvic acid for every molecule of glucose? 2 molecules to remember. Because this is 6-carbon, this is 3-carbon. Clear till here? Where is this process taking place? In the cytoplasm. But now we try understanding that now this pyruvic acid will have different fate depending on what type of cell it is. If pyruvic acid is present in a cell where there is abundance of oxygen, remember I already told you certain organisms, abundance of oxygen and mitochondria and well-developed respiratory structure, the method is different. So if it is abundance of oxygen, then what are the products? Products are carbon dioxide and water and 38 molecules of ATP. What is this process known as? This process is known as aerobic respiration. This process is known as aerobic respiration. And later, when we are talking about that, this pyruvic acid also actually gets broken down. This pyruvic acid gets broken down to these products. What is this breakdown of the pyruvic acid to carbon dioxide, water, ATP known as? This is known as Krebs cycle. Where is this process happening? Inside the mitochondria. Inside the mitochondria only this process can happen. What am I speaking? I am saying glucose to pyruvic acid is common for every organism. But if it is the pyruvic acid which will be present or which is present in us, all of you have to write down the flow chart exactly what I am writing. This question as it is for 3 marks you get in your paper. What are the different methods of glucose breakdown? These are the 3 steps. Nicely, correctly you write. Life is so easy for you. Straight away they give you 3 marks. So now that the pyruvic acid is present in cells with mitochondria and oxygen, then what is the pathway? The pathway is this. The pathway is this. What is it? Aerobic respiration. The products you already know. Let us talk about the third. In the third step, complete absence of oxygen. If it is complete absence of oxygen and then no mitochondria, then what are the products? Ethyl alcohol plus small amount of carbon dioxide and 2 molecules of ATP. What is this process known as? This process is also known as alcoholic fermentation or just fermentation. So already you have learned this too. Now something more we have to study. What is that something more that we have to study? Yeah, okay. Now let us complete first. What is this method also known as? This method is known as anaerobic respiration. This method is known as anaerobic respiration. Now, next is, do organisms like us show anaerobic respiration? Yes. Temporarily. Temporarily. Very good. Yes. Say suppose you are running, you are climbing a hill, excessive muscular activity, you are playing a sport. I think quite a number of you who do so much of physical activity must have suffered from muscular cramps or exhaustion of the muscles. Exhaustion of the muscles is very common if you are not even suffering from cramps. Whenever we are walking long distances, or we are running and finishing up certain work, and then a time comes that our muscle feels very tired and we are not able to run or walk, and we need that 2-3 minutes of rest, and then again we can continue with the work. So what is happening? Why does certain times our muscles become so exhausted that we are not able to carry on with the walking or the running, etc., or the swimming or whatever type of games or sports we are into? Because the muscles become so exhausted and they run short of oxygen. But that is for a short period of time. So what is happening is the rate at which oxygen enters and the rate at which oxygen used in the muscles is not the same. We are taking in small amount of oxygen and the utilization in the muscles is much more. As a result, what is happening? The muscle starts becoming exhausted, a condition known as muscular cramp. So now to talk about the second step, what is it? Deficiency of oxygen. Don't close down your books. Second is deficiency of oxygen. Then what will be the products? The products would be lactic acid. The products would be lactic acid plus lactic acid in our muscles. Whenever you are running and you suffer from exhaustion, too much of muscle exhaustion, pain or cramps, this particular process did not happen because the muscles are running short of oxygen, and at that time what is happening? The pyruvic acid starts getting converted to lactic acid temporarily, and when you take rest for some time, again the supply of oxygen is adequate, and then the lactic acid will again be broken down to carbon dioxide water. So what is the temporary phase when we talk about that in our muscle cells, and that this happens for us, but this is a temporary phase. This is not a permanent phase at all. So these are the 3 steps possible when we have to learn the entire process of glucose breakdown. All of you please complete this flow chart and remember the steps to follow. The next class will solve some questions on this and carry on with the next part of the chapter.
मैं पीछे था
अरे इतना मार दिया चल चल आजा अरे अभी बाहर ही तो मैं जल्दी
तो भाई मजाक
साइड